Welcome to this deep dive. Today we're really getting into the details surrounding a pretty recent and, let's be honest, quite eye-catching event.
That's right. Elon Musk's formal departure from his government job, leading the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, under President Trump.
Exactly. And we've gathered quite a bit of material, various articles and reports that cover the Oval Office send-off itself, but also the context around his time there.
Yeah, and some pretty surprising, allegations and other details that sort of popped up right around the same time.
So our mission here, as always, is to unpack all these sources for you, pull out the really key bits of information.
Help you get up to speed quickly on Musk's stint in government, how it ended, and all the noise surrounding it.
Okay, let's jump right in then. The send-off itself, May 30th, Oval Office. What did the sources say?
Well, they paint a picture of a very formal event. President Trump taking the lead, thanking Musk publicly for everything he did.
And it wasn't just a thank you, was it? I read something about a golden key.
Yeah, a golden key. Trump apparently gave it to him. Said something like, Elon's delivered a colossal change in the old ways of doing business in Washington. High praise, definitely.
It sounds like it. Very, very positive on the surface.
It does, yeah. But that's what's interesting, right? The sources immediately contrast that warm public moment with what they describe as the underlying reality.
Okay, what reality is that?
Well, the reporting alongside the send-off details suggests Musk was actually leaving with, one source called it a reputational black eye.
Ouch, a black eye.
Yeah, and that during his time there, he'd become, a much more polarizing figure. So quite a difference from the golden key moment.
Right, so you've got the official story, success, change, and then this other layer of, controversy and polarization. Let's dig into DOGE itself. What was its main job supposed to be?
The core goal laid out in the sources was pretty clear. Find ways to save money across the federal government. Cut costs.
Simple enough goal. But the numbers. The sources really focus on the numbers, don't they? There were some huge figures talked about initially.
Oh, massive, yeah. The sources mentioned talk on the campaign trail about potentially saving like $2 trillion.
$2 trillion, wow.
Yeah, and then after Trump took office, that apparently became a pledge of $1 trillion in savings. Still a huge number.
Okay, so a $1 trillion pledge. What did the sources say DOGE actually reported in savings by the time Musk left? So far, I think they phrased it.
Right, so far. The figure that pops up is about $160 billion.
Okay, hold on. $160 billion compared to a $1 trillion pledge. That's a pretty big difference.
It's a huge gap. Yeah.
Did the sources explain that? Or talk about the criticisms DOGE was getting?
Oh, absolutely. That's covered quite a bit.
Yeah.
The reporting mentions lots of complaints that DOG's methods were too blunt, like indiscriminate cutting.
Indiscriminate cutting, meaning?
Meaning they were accused of hurting important government programs without really thinking through the consequences, just cutting across the board.
And wasn't there some nonpartisan research mentioned, too, looking at the real impact of those savings?
Yes, exactly. Several sources point to studies by nonpartisan groups. And their findings were, pretty stark.
What did they find?
They calculated that a lot of those $160 billion in savings, maybe even most of it, could actually be wiped out.
Wiped out? By what?
By other costs the government incurred. Things like having to rehire workers who were apparently fired illegally, paying for legal defenses.
Ah, okay.
And even lost revenue. The example given was shrinking the IRS. The idea being fewer agents means less tax collected, which costs the government money.
So the savings weren't just smaller than promised. They might have even been canceled out by hidden costs or negative effects. That's quite a different picture.
It really is.
How did Musk and Trump respond to all this pushback, did the sources say?
They did. Trump apparently described Musk as having suffered, quote, the slings and the arrows, taking the heat, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And Musk himself reportedly said that DOGE had become a kind of bogeyman within the government, the department everyone loved to hate.
A bogeyman. And did that stay just inside Washington? Or did the sources say this controversy affected Musk's other businesses, like Tesla?
The reporting definitely suggests it spilled over. Sources mentioned protests specifically targeting companies like Tesla.
Protests?
Yeah, and also reports that Tesla sales were slipping, which these sources linked, at least partially, to Musk's polarizing government role and the backlash against him.
Wow. Okay, so it had real-world consequences for his business empire, too.
Seems like it, based on this reporting.
So given all that context, the controversy, the criticism, let's talk about his status after the send-off. What was his official role and how did that change?
Right. His formal title was special government employee.
Huh?
And the sources point out there's a limit on that.
A limit.
Yeah, you can only work like 130 calendar days a year in that kind of role. So his official time under that specific title was up. It ended.
Okay, so formally, he's out. But did he actually say he was done with government work entirely?
Well, that's another one of those interesting contradictions in the reporting. On May 30th, the same day as the send-off,
Yeah.
Musk apparently claimed he was really not leaving, said DOGE was more like a way of life now, that it was permeating throughout the government.
Permeating, okay.
And he also said he planned to keep visiting, keep consulting with Trump. He even quoted Trump calling DOGE his baby.
So on one hand, he's saying, I'm still involved, this isn't really over.
Exactly. But then the sources immediately follow that up with actions Musk reportedly took that seemed to, well, point in the opposite direction.
Like what? What actions?
Like reports that he was taking steps to kind of distance himself from politics, and specifically from the Trump administration, after what the sources called a tumultuous period.
Distancing himself, how? What examples did they give?
Well, a big one cited was his plan to spend a lot less money on political campaigns from now on.
Less.
Yeah. And the sources helpfully reminded readers of his past spending like $290 million apparently spent helping get Trump elected.
Wow. $290 million.
And another $20 million on some judicial race in Wisconsin that didn't pan out.
Yeah.
So cutting back on that kind of spending is a pretty clear signal, right?
Yeah, it sounds like it. Anything else?
There was also mention of him actually criticizing one of Trump's main legislative goals while he was still technically in the DOGE role.
Criticizing Trump's priority, what was it about?
He apparently said this particular legislative priority would just add to the deficit.
Oh.
And that it would, quote, undermine the work that the DOGE team is doing, basically saying it ran counter to his cost-cutting mission.
So you've got the public praise, the golden key, him saying he's staying involved,
Yeah.
but then reports of him pulling back on spending and even criticizing the administration's plans. It's complex.
Very complex. The sources definitely paint a picture full of contradictions.
Okay, shifting gears a bit. Something else very noticeable at that May 30th event, completely separate from policy, Musk had a black eye.
Yes, that definitely got attention. Sources noted it was quite visible. He was dressed all in black, even had a DOGE hat on, and this prominent black eye.
So what was the story there? How did the sources say he explained that?
His explanation, as reported, was, well, kind of unusual. He said it happened while horsing around with his 5-year-old son, X.
Horsing around.
Yeah, he apparently told his son, go ahead, punch me in the face. And he did it.
He told his 5-year-old to punch him in the face. And the kid did.
That's the reported story.
Yeah. Okay. Did the sources mention what people made of that?
They noted it definitely stirred up speculation on social media, as you'd expect.
I bet.
And they also added this detail that his son, X, had apparently been seen with him quite a bit the weeks before, like tagging along in the Oval Office and on Capitol Hill.
Interesting. Okay, so the literal black eye adds another layer. And speaking of layers, the sources also covered some pretty serious allegations about drug use, right? Which came out around the same time.
They did. This was a big part of the reporting right around his departure. Specifically, a New York Times report that actually came out on May 30th, the very same day as the send-off.
And what did that report allege?
It alleged that Musk frequently used drugs such as ketamine, ecstasy, and psychedelic mushrooms, specifically while campaigning with Trump in 2024.
While campaigning. Did the report say anything about whether this alleged use happened while he was actually working for DOGE, on the clock, so to speak?
That's a key point. The Times report specifically said it was unclear if he used drugs during his actual DOGE work hours.
Okay, unclear. How did Musk react when he was asked about these allegations? I think a reporter asked him right there in the Oval Office event.
Yeah, they did. According to the sources, he basically dodged the question.
Dodged to how?
He reportedly started criticizing the New York Times for their reporting back in 2016 about Russian interference, and then just said, let's move on. Didn't address the drug allegation directly.
And the sources put this in context too, right? Mentioning his previous statements on drug use.
Yes, they did. They brought up his acknowledgement from March 2024 that he uses prescription ketamine for depression.
Right, I remember that.
And also, him saying previously he used a small amount of ketamine, maybe once every other week, and that he used marijuana almost never. They also referenced that 2018 incident.
The podcast one.
Yeah, where he smoked marijuana during a podcast recording. which apparently worried some of his corporate executives quite a bit at the time.
And wasn't the New York Times report building on earlier stories too?
It was. There was a Wall Street Journal story back in January 2024 that had alleged Musk used things like LSD, cocaine, ecstasy, and mushrooms.
So these weren't entirely new allegations, but maybe new detail.
Right. The Times report added that detail about his ketamine use being frequent enough that it supposedly affected his bladder.
Okay. And did the sources link any of this to his behavior?
Some did, yeah, mentioning what they described as related erratic behavior during the campaign.
Such as?
Like, one example given was him jumping up on stage behind Trump during a rally in Pennsylvania back in October. Sort of unexpected moments like that.
Wow. Okay, so this whole period sounds like it was just packed with drama, politically, personally.
It really does seem that way based on the reporting. And speaking of drama, the sources also detailed these alleged physical confrontations.
Physical confrontations, like actual fights.
Well, that's how some sources described it. Steve Bannon, former Trump strategist, apparently told the Daily Mail about a violent outburst and a physical confrontation.
Between who?
Between Musk and the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent.
Musk and the Treasury Secretary, what supposedly started it?
According to Bannon's account, Bessent confronted Musk directly about the savings figures from DOGE, called them meager.
Ah, the $160 billion versus $1 trillion issue again.
Exactly. Bannon said Bessent called Musk out on it, and Musk got physical. Bannon's description was basically that Musk shoved him.
Shoved the Treasury Secretary.
That's what Bannon alleged. Said it was a real sore subject for Musk and emphasized it was physical, not just shouting.
Were there other accounts of this? Or just Bannon?
No, other sources picked it up too. It was apparently first reported back in April, but the physical details emerged later. Axios had a witness description.
Yeah. What did the witness say?
They described it as like WWE in the hall of the West Wing.
WWE? Seriously?
Between two billionaire middle-aged men. That was the quote.
Wow. And was there shouting involved too?
Oh, yeah. Bessent was reportedly yelling, F you, repeatedly at Musk.
And Musk.
Musk reportedly responded with things like, I can't hear you and say it louder, taunting him almost.
This sounds completely wild. Where did this supposedly happen in the Oval Office?
It apparently started there, but then spilled out, moved outside the Chief of Staff's office, and then later ended up near the National Security Advisor's office, so it moved around the West Wing.
Unbelievable. And according to Bannon, who did Trump take sides with after this WWE match?
Bannon claimed Trump 100% sided with Bessent, the Treasury Secretary.
Okay. Did the White House say anything official about this alleged brawl?
They did comment, yeah. The press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, confirmed to the Daily Mail that a confrontation happened in April.
Confirmed it?
Yes, but she framed it very differently. Called it the kind of disagreement that happens between passionate people, normal part of the policy process. And she added a reminder that everyone serves at the president's pleasure.
So the White House acknowledges something happened, but downplays the physicality described by others. Another case of conflicting accounts.
Exactly. And believe it or not, the sources mentioned this wasn't the only reported blowup involving Musk at that level.
There was another one.
Yep. A separate confrontation, apparently back in March, during a cabinet meeting.
Who was involved in that one?
This one was reportedly between Musk and the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio.
Rubio. And what was the topic?
Reportedly, it was about DOGE's mass firings, the controversial cuts again.
And what happened after that confrontation?
Well, the sources note the timing. Shortly after that clash with Rubio, President Trump went public saying he intended to rein in Musk's cost-cutting.
Ah, so maybe that confrontation had a direct impact on policy, or at least on Trump's public stance.
The sources certainly imply a connection there. It paints a picture of a lot of internal friction around DOGE.
Definitely sounds like it. Okay, one last thing. The sources mentioned a couple of other little anecdotes from that same May 30th Oval Office event where Musk got the golden key. Side notes, almost.
Right, just other things that happened while reporters were there. One was Trump giving advice to French President Macron.
Advice about what?
About that viral video involving Macron's wife. Trump reportedly just said, make sure the door remains closed. The sources added that Trump kind of downplayed the whole video incident, saying Macron was fine and they were two really good people, and Macron himself had called it joking around.
Got it. And the other anecdote?
Trump was asked by a reporter about possibly pardoning the rapper Sean Combs' Diddy, who's facing federal charges.
And what did Trump say?
He reportedly said, well, nobody's asked for pardon. But he didn't rule it out. He added, I know people are thinking about it.
Interesting. Okay, so that pretty much covers the ground from these sources then.
Yeah.
We've gone through the official send-off, the DOGE context, the big gap in saving.
Right, the criticisms, the controversies, that mix of public praise versus all the underlying tension and conflict reported in the sources.
And then all the personal stuff too, the black eye story, the drug allegations, which were quite serious.
And those alleged physical confrontations. The WWE and the West Wing, it's a lot.
It really is. And just to reiterate for everyone listening, everything we've talked about here comes only from the source materials we reviewed for this deep dive. We're just relaying what they reported, trying to present it impartially.
Absolutely. And thinking about all of together, the ambition of DOGE, the reported results, the clashes, the personal headlines, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Yeah, it leaves you with a big question. So here's something for you, the listener, to think about. Considering everything these sources detail, the successes claimed, the failures alleged, the praise, the criticism, the sheer drama, what do you think the lasting impact of Elon Musk's time in government will actually be?
Not just on the government itself, but maybe on his own reputation, his businesses, his future plans. What's the takeaway from this whole episode based on what we've learned from these reports?
Definitely something to chew on.